All right, we are live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Conscientious Omnivore. My name is Pal. Today we've got Logan Blake here with me, and we're going to have another person join us. It looks like Broski for you won't be able to join us, but we are going to. My name is Pal. Today we've got Logan Blake here. Sorry about that. Had another window going. Yeah, we're going to have another person joining called Starch Muncher, who I had previously listed as Wicked Hangover. So should be fun. We're going to be talking about cholesterol and the effects of consuming cholesterol, saturated fat on your blood serum cholesterol, as well as a bunch of other related kind of health topics, and of course, explaining how and why a whole food vegan diet can be extremely healthy and help you with your blood serum cholesterol and maintain healthy levels for optimal cardiovascular health. Logan, is that a good summary? Kind of any words to add?
Sounds good. I like cholesterol, but only my own cholesterol.
Nice. Yep, we make all the cholesterol we need. Cool. All right, so today is going to be kind of a chance to geek out a little bit on studies, and it's going to be different than our usual kind of previous live streams where we either debated or just kind of talked. This is a little bit reminiscent of what we did with Milk Jar, in the sense that we're going to actually go into details of the scientific literature and talk about some of the journal entries. I'm going to actually start, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to the usual vegan approach, which is instead of showing you guys the studies that actually back up the claims of the plant-based doctors, I'm going to actually show you a study that a typical meat eater would try to use to argue against a whole food diet, and I'm going to show you where it's kind of inconsistent and why it's illogical or wrong. So just a brief couple words. If anybody hasn't seen the videos done by Dr. Greger on nutritionfacts.org, where he talks about how the saturated fat and cholesterol studies are intentionally misleading, I would definitely recommend that people go and check those out after. They're extremely well done and have tons of examples about how these studies tend to be funded by the either the egg boards or the beef association, or some other kind of animal agriculture industry, or sometimes big pharma as well. But ultimately, there are a number of ways where you can basically measure the impact of dietary saturated fat and cholesterol on your blood serum cholesterol levels. And unfortunately, the way that people often try to do when they look at correlation studies, those do not work for showing a relationship between the consumption of saturated fat and cholesterol and your blood serum cholesterol. And this is not new information. Science has actually determined this, back in the 60s and 70s. They already had information that showed that a correlation study, a cross-sectional observation study, does not work to show a correlation. And the reason being is that there are genetic differences between people. So I think Dr. Greger, shows a chart where you have one person eating the same number of chicken McNuggets or whatever, and you have another person eating the same amount, and their blood serum cholesterol levels might be different just because somebody is a little bit more lucky. They kind of won the genetic lottery. Like Logan might be luckier than me. If he eats the same amount, his cholesterol might be, like let's say a lower range. It might be like only 170, and I might be really unlucky and I eat the same amount, and we might be the same height, same weight, and mine might be 200. So when you look at a population, it doesn't matter how big or how small, you will not find enough correlation for it to be statistically significant because of these differences. And every year, these types of studies get trotted out over and over and over again. And a lot of times what they do is they do a meta-analysis of the studies that were already done. And that's the example that I want to show you guys right now. So I'm going to share my screen here. And hopefully you guys can see it. Let me just check in the chat real quick. First of all, quick question. Can everybody hear us? And is the sound okay? If somebody could just chat back real quick. Cool. All right. So
yeah, it sounds okay. I just played the video.
All right. Nice, great. And I can see that the screen is sharing, so this is great. So, so basically, you know, this is a meta-analysis that was done in 2017. So it was about a year ago in April that they did this, and it's looking at saturated fat consumption and risk of coronary heart disease and stroke. And basically, you know, they're going into the abstract here. They're explaining that you know, epidemiological methods and outcomes were related to the association between saturated fat consumption and disease events and mortality. Participants reviewed the effects of the saturated fat on coronary heart disease, causal risk factors, and surrogate risk markers. And higher intakes of saturated fat were not associated with the higher risks of coronary heart disease or stroke, apparently, but studies did not take macronutrient replacement into account. And then it basically talks about what kind of fats were used to replace saturated fat. And they, you know, basically did a whole bunch of studies looking at food matrices and trying to figure out exactly, you know, what kind of impact this might have. So in the introduction here, you can see kind of some references to other studies. And I'm going to come back to this and show you guys why this kind of shows what I said earlier. They are kind of referencing back to the same set of studies often. So it says, for decades, the consumption of long-chain saturated fatty acids containing blah, blah, blah carbon atoms was thought to undermine cardiovascular health. However, recent meta-analysis of prospective observational studies reported that saturated fat intake was associated with neither coronary heart disease, nor stroke mortality, nor myocardial infarction. And basically, you know, again, this proves what I was said earlier, that for decades people have known this. And they're saying that recently the prospective observational studies reported that there was no association. And again, like I said, for the past 50, 60 years, we've already known that cross-sectional observation studies cannot show, they are incapable of showing a you know, correlation or a connection. And yet they know this, but they keep bringing out these studies. Now, if you already have done a study and you've already proven something to be pointless, why do you keep spending money, and why do you keep you know, doing more research on it? It's clearly to push an agenda so that you can have newspaper report on these types of studies saying like, oh, a new study in 2017 found that there's no, you know, connection, no correlation between eating saturated fat and cholesterol and what your blood serum cholesterol will be. And here there's something interesting. It says reduced saturated fat intake that was replaced by polyunsaturated fat acids was associated with a 17% lower risk of cardiovascular events, which was confirmed by randomized control trials. That's interesting because I think that these are more like plant-based, you know, unsaturated fats. So these are considered to be the healthy fats. And, you know, those are associated with a lower risk of cardiovascular events. And those were done, confirmed by randomized control trials. So again, notice that these are controlled trials, randomized controlled trials. The other ones are just simply observational studies. So, you know, it's just interesting that, you know, they're basically trying to seem objective, and it's like they're intentionally, you know, trying to make it seem like there's no correlation. Another thing that I thought was interesting here was that they even mentioned the contrasting findings have challenged current saturated fat recommendations, generated vigorous debate, and led to consumer confusion. Therefore, to update and discuss the science linking saturated fat consumption and the risk of coronary heart disease and stroke, 20 international experts on dietary fat and health convened in the Netherlands as guests of the international expert movement to improve dietary fat quality, the Netherlands Oils and Fats Industry, and the European Palm Oil Alliance. So basically what they're saying is these three organizations, which I haven't looked into this dietary fat quality organization, but I would suspect that they're also trying to basically somehow sell to you the idea that dietary fat is good for you. But with the Netherlands Oil and Fats Industry and the European Palm Oil Alliance, I would venture to say that just on their name alone, they are probably some type of industry that profits from selling you guys oil and telling you to eat them. I just think it's funny that the the conflict of interest is so like apparent right in the introduction. So one thing that's interesting is here this the observational studies that they link right here in number 1 and 2. When you open these up, what you find is that the first one, which I've got open here, this one is basically the same kind of thing. They they look at the intake of saturated fat and trans fats and unsaturated fat and try to look for correlation between cardiovascular disease, diabetes, stroke, etc., all-cause mortality, all sorts of things like that. And it's again a meta-analysis. And what is interesting here is that in the reference of this study, there's just something I wanted to point out really quick. Where was it? Down here, references. They reference this study by Chowdhury R, Warnakula S, et cetera, and that is actually the study that's referenced in the first study I showed you. So this is Chowdhury R's reference, and it's again the same exact type of thing. This is another what do you call it? Observational study, meta-analysis review. And it was done a few years before. So it's like, this is exactly what Dr. Greger has shown in his videos. You take these, studies, you throw some money from the egg industry or the beef industry or wherever, the oil industry into, some college students, you do some kind of study, you send out people with food questionnaires or some kind of silly thing that like is neither, accurate nor, easily kind of explained. It just has a lot of like room for error, and statistically, kind of challenging, limited applications. And then, you just keep referencing those same kind of studies over and over again from one year to the next. And one of these, actually, there was another reference in that study where there was an interesting thing I want to point out. Sorry, give me 1 second to find it. Reduction in dietary saturated fat has generally been thought to improve cardiovascular health. And then here, they basically say again that a meta-analysis showed there was no significant evidence for concluding the dietary saturated fat is associated with an increased risk. And then they're saying more data needs to, come out to elucidate whether cardiovascular disease risks are likely to be influenced by the specific nutrients used to replace saturated fat. And the one of these, I think it's this one. They talk about the limitations and the problems with the method of study, and that's what I wanted to talk about. Give me 1 second. I gotta find it. Okay, here it is. A caveat of this study was its reliance on the accuracy of the dietary assessment of the component studies, which may vary depending on the method used. Underreporting of calories has often contributed to the error associated with dietary assessments, particularly in overweight individuals. So I think what that means is generally if somebody's already overweight, they think they're eating less than they actually are, so they're underreporting. Generally, 4 to 7 day food records are considered to be the most accurate means of dietary assessment, but such methods are generally not feasible in large cohort studies. A single 24-hour recall is relatively easy to collect, but the information does not reflect long-term dietary patterns. This is another thing that's very common on a lot of these studies that get published on these saturated fat denying kind of stories, is they take a 24-hour recall from people, and then they basically just say, follow up with them 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, etc. And it's all based off of that one 24-hour recall. So they don't even give people a chance to, give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe their dietary pattern may have gotten worse or better in that amount of time. It's all based off that one 24-hour recall survey. And this is just really ridiculous if you think about it. But, most people don't get into these kind of details when they're reviewing these things. They just simply read the mainstream articles that get put out about these kind of stories. And then they just assume that, there's no connection and I can keep eating full fat cheese and eggs and hamburgers and I'll be healthy. So, let me just finish this section here. I forget what this FFQ is. I think this is the frequent food questionnaire, have become the method of choice in large epidemiological studies because they are inexpensive and can assess long-term diets. However, this method is also subject to random and systematic errors. So basically, they're just saying that, some of these limitations are there, and, this is some of the things that they've struggled with, and blah, blah, blah. And here's the conclusion. Our meta-analysis show that there is insufficient evidence from prospective epidemiological studies to conclude that dietary saturated fat is associated with increased risk of coronary heart disease, stroke, or cardiovascular disease. The available data were not adequate for determining whether there are coronary heart disease or stroke associations with saturated fat in specific age and sex subgroups. And I think it was because in this one, they actually did find some correlation in certain age groups. But again, the whole point of this is that, just to sum it up, these studies cannot show this kind of correlation. And we've already known this for 50, 60 years. And yet you can just see time and time again that more and more of these get trotted out. And it seems like every time you talk to somebody who's kind of like anti-vegan or telling you that the plant-based doctors are biased or whatever, they love to point to one of these stories. And my challenge to any of these people is show me a study that is not an observational study, which shows that consuming saturated fat and cholesterol doesn't raise your cholesterol, and you're not going to be able to find one. So, Logan, do you want to add anything here before I hand it over to you? I think I'm pretty much done with my section here.
No, I think I don't know if you mentioned, I dipped out for like a minute there. I don't know if you mentioned the thing about the studies where they had 6 eggs and they compared.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so they compared baseline cholesterols, and there's actually a whole bunch of people from the egg board that were on this study. And then right now, like, doctors are actually, I don't know if they're in the midst right now of suing the egg people, but that was a thing for a while. And then eggs are also no longer allowed to advertise in commercials now that they are nutritious because of the amount of cholesterol that's in eggs. So even the law is basically saying, hey, cholesterol is bad.
Yeah, and there's another famous one too that we were talking about just before we went live, when Dr. Greger has highlighted one of the kind of more egregious, studies where it was done by the Beef Association, and what they did was they took people in the test groups and they reduced the overall amount of saturated fat that they were consuming. So they limited the amount of chicken and dairy that they were allowed to consume, so that their overall saturated fat intake dropped. And then what they did was they told them to eat more beef, but the amount of saturated fat in the beef was lower than what they dropped from the other sources. And then they showed that the consumption of beef was lowering their total cholesterol levels. So it's just, these kinds of tricks are being used to basically hoodwink people and, tell people like, look, eat more beef and your cholesterol will go down. And that's how they're getting away with it, that they're, tricking you. But nobody reads the fine print in these studies. So, yeah. Cool. So,
yes. So I got to I got a lot of things here, so we don't have to take too much time on each thing. Also, Starch Muncher I see is in the chat right now. He's asking, how do I join? So if you'd like to join, I sent you a DM on Twitter with the Hangouts link, so you just have to go there and click on that. I don't know if Starch Muncher has any of these same studies that he wanted to talk about as the ones that I'm going to talk about. So if he does want to join now, that'd be good, because if he has anything to add to any of these, that would be nice, or he could add them later on when he joins later. So the first one I have here is, let me pull this up here on the list.
And I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, Logan. So I'll just go through the links and tell me if you want me to highlight specific things.
Okay, so the first one I have on the list is called Effect of Long-Term Exposure to Lower Low-Density Lipoprotein Cholesterol Beginning Early in Life on the Risk of Coronary Heart Disease. So this study basically just shows that the earlier you start putting this cholesterol in your body, then it shows like these people who started earlier have more of a risk of increase, more of a chance of getting heart disease later in life. So basically, if I had a kid, I had two kids, right? And I started feeding one kid cholesterol at an earlier age than the other kid. The one kid who started eating foods with cholesterol in them has more of a chance of getting heart disease than the other child, according to this study here. I don't know if you've seen this study here.
No, I haven't seen this one. I'm just looking at the conclusion right here. Pretty much exactly what you said.
Yeah. So my cat's trying to jump in here. He heard cholesterol, so he's jumping. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, people can look into these studies too. A lot of them we don't have the full studies because it's illegal to show like the full length study online unless you pay for it, and then it's still illegal, I believe. So besides what I have written on the screen here, you can see the conclusions easily, and people can look into these studies as well. I mean, pretty much just by what you said at the beginning of this live stream would be enough for anybody to have their mind swayed. But I'm just going to add to what you said, basically. So moving on to the next thing here, reversing heart disease. A lot of people have seen this study. And while you're putting that up on the screen, so recently they had a Joe Rogan podcast with Kevin Smith on it, and Kevin Smith just suffered a heart attack. He was eating a basic American diet, junk food and meat and all that type of stuff. And after he had the heart attack, he went on a potato diet where he just ate nothing but potatoes, right? So even though you're not 100% sure that, it all came from meat or it all came from junk food or whatever, what happened was he went on the potato diet after he had the heart attack, and it started to lower his cholesterol significantly. So it just shows you the power of plants, of whole plant foods. His cholesterol was lowered so much immediately that they were actually worried that part of the blockages would break off and then travel up to his brain, which can be dangerous. So that's how fast plant foods can clear your arteries. It's actually worrisome. So if you think about if he just ate the whole plant foods in the first place, how clean his arteries would have been compared to trying to clean them out drastically afterwards, and then they're getting cleaned out too fast that part of the plaque's going to break off, right? So that's just kind of like an anecdote, I guess, about how fast plants will clear out your arteries. But then here's an actual study on reversing heart disease that was done by, let me see here, Dr. Esselstyn. He had 198 patients with advanced cardiovascular disease on a whole food vegan diet. 21 patients dropped out of the diet, which created a control group. They followed them over the next 12 years. And the 21 people, 62% of them had a heart attack or stroke. And the ones who stayed on the whole food vegan diet, only 0.6% had a heart attack or stroke out of 177 people. So this is a long-term 12-year study with a control group showing the reversal of what happens when you eat whole plant foods and you get off the meat and junk food. So the point I want to bring across too is people will argue animal products compared to junk food, which one's worse. Clearly you've just shown that animal products are bad, and we're also going to show that with a couple other things. But nobody can say that whole plant foods are terrible for heart disease, right? When you look at these, what the potato diet did for Kevin, this reversal of heart disease thing, you can't say, well, whole plant foods are causing heart disease like junk food and animal products. So why not just go on a whole plant foods diet, right? All right. So moving on to the next one here, we got this is just an interesting thing I wanted to bring up about red wine. So when people, there's a whole bunch of studies here about red wine and what it actually does to cholesterol, plasma cholesterol, and basically, in layman's terms, I'm not a scientist, but cholesterol from these studies seems to like thin the blood and is kind of like a hack, right, for getting around plaque on your arteries, right? So people, I think when they're doing these population studies of how many people are getting heart disease and strokes, they also need to look into other factors like, are these people drinking, red wine daily, right? Because this first red wine study talks about that here. And then if we move on to the next one here, the next one is called, let me see here, resveratrol, wine, and atherosclerosis. And I guess this resveratrol has been linked to getting around heart disease and strokes. And yeah, so a lot of these don't have the conclusions and stuff, and they're just the abstract certain parts. But if you move to the next one here, same thing. This one has to do with white wine and Pinot Noir. And this one's not as great because it's an animal study, right? Animal studies are worse than human studies, in my opinion. So this one was done on hamsters, but I mean, there's a plethora here of information about wines. So if you move on to the next one too, is another one called Red Wine, a Drink for Your Heart. So, I mean, I'm not going to go through all these. Like I said, there's so many of them. And people can go through these later on and judge for themselves what they think the answer is. And lastly, I got another one there after that called Red Wine Consumption and Prevention of Atherosclerosis, in vitro model using human peripheral blood mononuclear cells. So there's a bunch of studies on red wine and how you could hack your cholesterol with that. So lastly, regarding that, the French, Chinese, and Japanese, according to these articles and things I have linked below, if you move on to the next one here under the French, Chinese category here, it's called French Wine Consumption Shows Signs of Life. So clearly alcohol, most people would not say alcohol is good for you, right? And then people will use the moderation argument. So like, do you really want to hack your cholesterol using alcohol and then potentially get a disease from the alcohol, right? So you might not get heart disease if you're drinking this alcohol, but you'll get something else, right? So yeah, it says a growing number in France. So when they look at these population studies in France, China, and Japan, if you move on to the next one too there, they have a study here. Who drinks more wine, the Chinese or the Japanese? So it's an easy thing to figure out how much wine people are drinking, because I'm probably going too fast for you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries.
But yeah, so it's an easy thing to figure out, like how much wine people are drinking, because you would just see the sales and from the wine and liquor stores and grocery stores and things like that. So on top of that, they also do surveys and they ask the people, how much wine are you drinking regularly? And a lot of these Chinese and Japanese people, I think it was over 50%. It might say it in this one or the next one, that they're drinking like at least a glass or two a day. So a lot of people will look at Japan population studies or Chinese studies and be like, well, they eat meat, right? And they have lower heart disease and things like that. But there could be other factors. That's the point of why I'm bringing all this up, is, you do have to look at other factors, like are they hacking their heart disease with red wine or some other source?
Mhm.
And
Logan, if I could jump in
lastly,
just for 1 second, there was a
sure.
really interesting video that Dr. Greger did pretty recently where he talked about the French paradox, because a lot of times people talk about this whole thing about them having lower heart disease rates despite eating more saturated fat than a lot of the other countries that have low cardiovascular, problems. And what he says is that if you look at historically, like what they ate, they actually did consume, 30, 40 years ago, a lot less saturated fat and cholesterol than they do now. And what's happening is that those those diseases take decades to build up, and it's just starting to catch up with them. So if you look at more recent kind of statistics or people coming into that age now, their cardiovascular kind of like disease rates are actually in line with the high consumption countries, and it's just taken a while for it to catch up. So there's only so much that this wine and alcohol will actually protect you. I mean, it obviously has some type of protective effects, probably from all the polyphenols and all the other things like the resveratrol or whatever. But yeah, it's not going to like totally save you, and there are limits to how much it can help.
Yeah, and then you run the risk of getting liver disease too on
Right.
top of that too. So it's definitely not the way to go eat meat and then try to fix it with wine, right? So lastly, this is just kind of a weird thing that I saw that I thought would be interesting if people haven't heard of this before. So the Eskimos actually did drink a certain type of wine, and it's one of the most disgusting wines I've ever seen. There was actually a different website that I didn't send to you that was called like the 9 most disgusting wines or something, and there's like snake wine and all sorts of animal wines. So the Eskimos did drink wine. I don't know if they drank any other wine with berries or anything like that, but they definitely did drink seagull wine. I don't know if you have the right thing up there. You have to go to the next one. This is the Japanese. It's under Eskimos wine there, right there. So yeah, this is seagull wine, and you can scroll down, and you might think, well, this website is baloney or something. I actually looked it up, and it was on, it's a legit thing on tons of websites. They talk about this, and they're basically just comparing it to grabbing a seagull and throwing it into a bottle and letting it ferment and then drinking it. That's just absolutely disgusting. But I don't know how, I don't know anything about this. I don't know if it has any of the properties like red wine would, where it would actually, hack your cholesterol. But I mean, this is another stream, and I am going to make some videos on this in the future. The Eskimos and Inuits from their all meat diet did have bad health anyways, and that was proven in other studies that we could talk about another time.
Yep.
But yeah, I just thought that was a weird thing that people might want to see.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that this lady actually tasted it. So whoever posted this, Suzanne Donahue, says if you opened up a Toyota's carburetor and drank the leftover fluid from the inside, that would be pretty close. It goes down hard and settles in even worse. Yeah, it sounds terrible.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's even if I was a meat eater, I don't think I would want to try seagull wine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the next thing wanted to bring up here is about butter and margarine, right? So I guess, it's just people are just kind of brainwashed into thinking that they need both, right? Or they need one or the other for cooking or sandwiches or whatever it may be. And they have this article here, butter makes a comeback and margarine loses. So, I can't believe it's not butter. When it came out, I guess, it became popular, and then they had all this information come out about trans fats being bad for you and saying, well, you shouldn't have margarine because it has trans fats, and people are going back to butter. And you can see the graph there of people changing from butter to margarine. And it goes back and forth just based on media. Like the media is like, oh, trans fats are bad. Now animal products are bad. You know, this and that, and it goes back and forth, right? Really, they're both bad. You know, trans fats have been shown to calcify your arteries, and animal products have been shown to plaque your arteries. So they both, you know, clog your arteries in different ways. They're both bad. People should just ditch both. And if you actually look at the science behind it, if you look at the thing I posted underneath that, it is a study and it is called Theoretical Effects of Substituting Butter with Margarine on Risk of Cardiovascular Disease. It does actually say in this study, I believe at the bottom, let me see here, that margarine actually beats out butter when it comes to prevention of cardiovascular disease. So animal products still lost against the trans fats. And then the thing about that too is a lot of animal products, you know, like meats and whatever, they still have trans fats in them, right?
Yep,
even though it's
occurring.
not.
That's right.
Yeah. So I mean, the whole point of this is even if butter won in the study, they would still be both bad for you. But let's see here. Okay, and then I had another thing that's kind of like the red wine thing regarding cholesterol. A lot of these things like the red wine and the which one's better, butter or margarine. I mean, that one's pretty pointless, but like a lot of these things do need more research on. I think everything needs more research on, right? But it's very, very clear that animal products and eating saturated fats, cholesterol, the heme iron, L-carnitine, all these things are terrible for your arteries, right? So they have this article here about natto or NATO. I don't even know how to pronounce it. I've never had this before, but you know, it's what you know, vegans will point to when meat eaters will say, well, you can't get K2 from a vegan diet, right? I mean, actually, K1 will convert into K2 in your body, so that's a dumb argument. But then there is actual vegan foods like natto that have K2 in them, right? So this in Japan, not only do they drink a lot of red wine, but they also eat a lot of this natto. And if you look through this article here, I have a study too as well. It talks about how natto actually will hack cholesterol as well, and the K2 is very beneficial to preventing heart disease. But then if you eat too much of it, then it's also a problem. So it's like natto or NATO, whatever it is, in moderation will help heart disease. But then where is the line of moderation? And then if you go underneath for the next study, and it talks about the actual doses of the K2 in the natto and how it actually, it's a very, you know, very lengthy study here. And it actually talks about how it can help hack heart disease and things like that. And has been shown to be slightly beneficial. So there's so many factors that would go into population studies is my point. Besides just if you look at, oh, these people have better heart disease than these people or risk of heart disease than these people, you know, people need to also study these other things and what else they're eating and drinking to come up with good conclusions.
Yep.
And yeah, I wonder if I'm just gonna check quickly. I don't know if he messaged. Did he message you if Sturch Muncher was gonna jump in here or not?
No, and I had checked our group chat, which we had with Broski as well, because I had put the link in there too, but he hadn't replied to that. And I tried sending him a direct message, but he doesn't follow me, so I can't message him directly.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Oh well. Well, if he does, he does. If he doesn't, he doesn't. Okay, so the next thing I have on here is just a fun fact for people about the food pyramid that people have been recommending for a long time. I know it's slightly changed now, right? If you look at the food pyramid now, They are adding things like mock meats, soy, tofu. There's more of nuts and seeds and meat alternative sections and things like that. But this is what people have been recommending for the longest time here. I watched a documentary called Food Choices, and I think it's Dr. Esselstyn was talking about how dairy has a huge role with like the food pyramid and things like that, and the recommendations in RDA, and the calcium recommendation was actually set really high because of dairy's influence, because they wanted them to drink more milk, people to go drink more milk and stuff. So a lot of this isn't even like these food pyramids and RDAs. A lot of this stuff isn't even science-based. It's really just, money-based, right? And same with dietitians. Dietitians are sponsored by dairy. Well, the Dietitians of Canada anyways, and the Diabetes Foundation. If you look at their food guides on their page, every meal is filled with dairy, right? And does that mean dairy is good for diabetes, or does that mean dairy should be eaten in every meal? No, but I mean, then you was like, why is that on there, right? It's got to be because they paid them, right? So if you look at this, the food guide here, the very top is junk food, right? And if you're a vegan, right, meat eaters might not understand this, but if you're a vegan, it's very hard to find vegan junk food, right? Like pastries, you go to the grocery store, everything's made with dairy and eggs. Like I can't go to, say, I'm Canadian, I can't go to Tim Hortons and go get a donut, or like nothing there. Nothing there is vegan. If you look at chips, they're all filled with dairy. Even candy is all filled with gelatin and animal products and things like that, right? Milkshakes, you name it. So then we got oils underneath. We just kind of talked about oils, how they're both bad for you. Either you're buying the animal products, the butter one, or you're buying the vegetable oils, or the other thing. They're both bad. Underneath that, they're recommending 2 servings of meat, right? They do have beans and nuts in there, right? But, through advertising and everything else, the majority of people are eating meat. Milk, yogurt, and cheese, 3 servings a day. So we're already just, the things are already just filled with animal products. Then we go on to whole meal cereals, breads, potatoes, pasta, and rice. And
that's like the only decent part of the triangle.
Yeah, but it's actually still not, because if you ever went to buy cereal, I believe all of Kellogg's cereal is not vegan. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the vitamin D in it being made from lanolin, but there's so many cereals actually that are made with animal products. Then also breads. There's a lot of breads made with animal products too. So really only half of that. And then just in general, like any type of processed food, if you think about how hard it is to read, it's not hard anymore, but like for the first couple of weeks, being vegan, to figure out what's vegan, there's so many processed foods out there that are not vegan, right? Like,
yeah,
and the only good part of this food guide is the very bottom, the 5 to 7, fruits and vegetables section here. And that should be, the majority of what people's diets are. So this whole food pyramid is just crap, and it should be like eat majority fruits and vegetables, and then a few of other things maybe in there. And then if you move on to the picture that I sent you.
Yeah, and just one thing before we move on here, I actually had done a video a while back when it was February about the calcium recommendation specifically, and I gave some really good detailed information in there, and showed kind of some of these recommendations from the FDA and how they're totally bogus. And there was a study that I cited in there from the Harvard School of Medicine or whatever it was, that they basically talk about the calcium recommendation specifically, and how getting as much calcium as is recommended by the FDA is actually linked with an increased risk of like a whole host of problems. And I think one of them was actually cardiovascular disease, and like stroke, and a few other problems associated with it. So check that out too if anybody hasn't seen it, because the calcium level set is really high. And if you look at the World Health Organization, it's much lower. I think it's actually half. It's something like 500 milligrams or whatever it is versus the 1,000 that the FDA recommends. And even in like the UK, it's somewhere in between. I think it's like 700. So like they just totally go crazy on it. And it's obvious, like you said, Logan, that it's from the funding of these, dairy industries. So,
yeah. And then that's a big problem I have too with a lot of websites or apps like, say, Chronometer or MyFitnessPal, things like that, about these recommendations, because people don't even really know where these recommendations are coming from when they're on these apps, and they're just saying, well, that's what I should be hitting every day. Realistically, a blood test would be way better, right? Because I'll give you two examples of two different diets. So if you looked at the people that were on the potato diet, I think it was a year, maybe 2 years, I'm not sure. People did it for different lengths of time. If you were to punch in potatoes, like I did this yesterday, I took in sweet potatoes and I punched in over 3,000 calories worth of sweet potatoes for a day. Sweet potatoes are one of the best types of potatoes, right? So the potato diet is all potatoes. So it would be, sweet potatoes, but then, maybe white or red or whatever it is. And they might have less things in them too. So these people were eating whole diets of potatoes and their blood tests were great, right? But then if you looked at what I punched into Chronometer, it looked like they were, it looked like you would be deficient in a whole bunch of things. I think one of the things was calcium. I can't remember. But then you kind of think like, well, where are they getting these numbers from? If blood tests come out perfect after a year or two, how could and they're not deficient in these things in the blood tests, how could they be deficient daily on these apps? And then the same thing happens with fruit diets, right? So if you look at the fruitarian Michael Arnstein, he eats a bunch of fruit every day. He has perfect blood tests, and other fruitarians have had perfect blood tests too. And then to punch that into Chronometer, it'll tell you, oh, you're missing this, you're missing that, So I don't think those things are to be fully trusted, is what I'm doing.
Do you think, Logan, that some of that might be from the kind of like micro things that are like rounding errors? And what I mean by that is like, it's like a common trick with like the trans fats, for example, like on the labels, they'll put 0, but it's really like, it's like 0.01 or something. But if you eat enough of it, it adds up. But they don't have to label it. Do you think it's something like that? Like it might just be under some threshold, and that's why it's not showing you any.
Yeah, I think there's that too. And then a lot of the things too on things like Chronometer. A Chronometer is a more popular one, so it is probably better than others. But a lot of the times it's just somebody reading a label or looking it up on another website and then just punching it in what this other website is telling them. And it could be wrong, because somebody actually told me this about mangoes, because I made a claim about mangoes that you could get basically everything you need from just only eating mangoes. And somebody told me, well, you won't get enough zinc according to Chronometer. So I Googled it, and there is 0.5 milligrams of zinc per mango. The RDA for zinc is 11 grams for a male. And so that would mean you eat 22 mangoes, right? So if you were eating nothing but mangoes in a day, obviously you could easily eat 22. I could eat 22 probably in one sitting. But yeah, so I mean, it would be very simple. And then, but then that goes into also a calorie is not a calorie. So if you ate 4,000 calories from mangoes, it wouldn't be equivalent to 4,000 calories from meat, right? Because you would have a different body composition and different health.
Yeah,
if you ate meat, 4,000.
I would certainly agree with that. Yeah, and that's some of that is the metabolism as well, because the whole thing about metabolizing carbs into fat and all this kind of stuff. So that takes more energy. Some of it, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I just did a video on that recently too. It's called like de novo lipogenesis, and they did a study where they showed where they overfed a bunch of people. They overfed them like 280 grams of fat, protein, and carbs and things like that. And it turned out the fat that was stored on the body, it was like 1% of it came from the carbs, and they were really overfed on carbs and stuff like that. And the carbs were just used up as energy. and what actually stored was the fat and probably some protein.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think just for anybody who's watching, right, like, you know, I think eating tons of fruits and veggies is super healthy, and I would even say that you know, if somebody wanted to eat an all fruitarian diet, I wouldn't even really have a problem with that. I have certain issues about it that you and I have chatted about before, but it's more just like convenience factor, I think. And then also, depending on where you're living, just the access to the fresh fruit or in-season fruit is maybe a challenge for some people. But ultimately, I would say even if we wanted to kind of look at like a going back to nature kind of solution, it would be really unlikely for you to eat nothing but one mono meal of anything, whether that's potatoes or mangoes or anything else. Like you would still probably be eating a variety of fruits. You would be eating whatever's ripening. So at one point you might be eating, you know, a ton of mangoes, but then maybe some other, you know, tropical fruit would be ripening the next, you know, 2-3 weeks later, and then you'd be eating that. So you would still be getting variety in that way, and you would still probably be eating some other things alongside it. So maybe some starches, or, you know, some other kind of, you know, greens or leafies or whatever. So.
Yeah.
And Arnstein does that too, right? Because I don't know if you've ever seen it, but like he shows his fridge, right? And he's got all the papayas and the mangoes and all this kind of beautiful fruit. But then he still has like a whole head of like lettuce, or like he has like a whole thing of, you know, whatever, some kind of, you know, sorrel or some kind of green, you know, thing that he's still eating.
Yeah. And and he's a perfect example of a calorie is not a calorie, because if you look at what he eats, he weighs 117 pounds, right? Like maybe 119 pounds, and he eats up to 8,000 calories a day, right? He runs a lot, but still, I mean, you're not going to burn off that much, you know, when you're running. You might burn off a few thousand, but that's still a significant amount. Now, if you look at the world's strongest man, like Brian Shaw, if he was to eat all of his calories in fruit, he would not look like that, right? And same would be the opposite. If Michael Arnstein ate all of his calories in meat like Brian Shaw does, they would switch body types almost if they were doing the opposite sports. Well, I was gonna also say too about what you're talking about mono mealing. There's an interesting page I was just looking at 2 days ago about a guy named the Mangotarian. I don't know if you've ever seen that channel.
No, I haven't checked that out. I'll have to look.
Yeah, so there's a guy named the Mangotarian, and he basically mono-mealed mangoes for almost a year. I think he was over 200 days just eating only mangoes. And he said, you know, like everything was great and this and that. He eventually stopped. He's got really long videos. I haven't watched all of them or anything, but I think he was even saying he lives on a place called like Mango Island, where it's just mangoes everywhere, right? So
that sounds like
there would be, there would be places where, like in the world, where it's just abundant in one fruit, right? So you might eat like the majority of your diet's all mangoes, just like if you would, like, say you moved into the north, and then during the winter you had to store food underground, and all you could store was like only potatoes. You might mono meal potatoes for like a long time, and maybe that's why people do so well on the potato diet.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was lucky enough a number of years back to be in Hawaii for a cousin's wedding, and we went out to some pretty remote beaches and stuff. And one of the beaches that we found was recommended on like the internet. You had to walk through this like mango grove to get to it, and it was just totally wild. There was no like, you know, human cultivation there. It was just trees growing, you know, wild. And man, there were just so many mangoes. They were just falling on the ground and like basically rotting away. It smelled like this alcoholic mango mix of like, I don't know, pure fruit craziness. And it was just like so wonderful. But like so many places we went to, there was just fruit just falling down on the ground everywhere. There were like avocado groves we went through, and like mangoes and papayas and just all this wonderful fruit. It was awesome. We had persimmons too, and everything was just growing wild just by the side of the road and stuff. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So so the thing I posted here about this is what actually people are eating in the U.S., right? So that was what I showed earlier was the U.S. food guide. So if people like were actually following it, they would be eating 5 to 7 fruits or vegetables per day. And if you look at what people actually ate, it was really bad, right? So they 63% of what people in the U.S. eat is processed food, and like I mentioned, like it's it's not incredibly easy to find vegan processed food. A lot of it contains dairy and eggs, and then also on top of that, it's going to be other chemicals and crap. But then also we got 25% of it is animal foods, and it points out here that cholesterol is found only in animal foods. And then we look over here, plant food, 12% plant foods, and it points out that fiber is found only in plant foods, right? So, I mean, people aren't even following that food guide is crappy to begin with, right? And then on top of that, people aren't even following that crappy food guide. It's even worse than the crappy food guide, right? And then you could easily see why heart disease is rampant because, of this cholesterol and these processed foods that all contain animal products as well.
Yeah. And this is a perfect thing. It's like the food pyramid upside down, because at the top was the junk food, and here this is the bulk of it.
Yeah.
So it's literally like they just turned the proportions the wrong way.
Yeah. And it's not this is an easy thing to figure out too, because you could just go by sales, right? You just look in the grocery store and you determine this is how much of this that people bought, and this is how much of this that people bought, right? So it's not like this is somebody just made it up. It's a very easy thing to figure out just to look at sales. So moving on to the next thing under the chart here. So it's a study about saturated fats affecting cholesterol. And it's called Consumption of Saturated Fat Impairs the Anti-Inflammatory Properties of High-Density Lipoproteins and Endothelial Function. So the conclusion here is consumption of saturated fat reduces the anti-inflammatory potential of HDL and impairs arteries I don't know these goddamn words, function. So basically that the saturated fat is a big problem with your cholesterol as well. So saturated fat is, mainly found in animal products along with cholesterol. Now you can find saturated fats in, say, something like walnuts, right? But if you look at walnuts, they have more. They only have 6 grams of saturated fats, and the rest of the fat is polyunsaturated fat. And in this study, I believe this is the study that they show that polyunsaturated fat does way better than saturated fats for your arteries, right? So it's better to have the polyunsaturated fats. Therefore, the saturated fats are high in animal products. They're low in things like walnuts. So you're way better off getting your fats from walnuts than you are from animal products, right? Or plant foods that are similar to walnuts.
Yeah, I think there have been some good videos that Dr. Greger's done on the fat from nuts. And generally speaking, I think, within reason, you're eating a handful of nuts a day. That's totally fine and actually good for your health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he even has a video on what's like the healthiest type of nut, and I think walnuts is at the top somewhere too. So that's a really good choice. You do want to alternate like the foods that you're eating. You don't want to just eat only walnuts or whatever. So just find some good choices and just alternate them. And I would do the same with green leafy vegetables and fruit and everything else. Don't eat the exact same thing every day. Even though there is a lot, I didn't even really know this, that there was monomeal fruitarians. I didn't think about it that much, but like if you look at what the 30 bananas a day thing is, that's monomealing fruit, right? So there's a lot of those people out there that think it's good to just monomeal fruit all the time and do it for days on end. So I don't know. We need more research on that as well.
Yep.
Okay, so the next study is, this one's all about vegans. So gluten-free vegan diet induces decreased LDL cholesterol. So they showed in the conclusion here, a gluten-free diet in RA induces changes that are potentially atheroprotective and anti-inflammatory, including decreased LDL cholesterol and a bunch of other stuff that I don't know what it means. But yeah, so basically, you know, everything's pointing in the direction of plants over animal products. I mean,
I would only add to this one thing, my personal, you know, experience, which is obviously an anecdote. My LDL got cut from 118 down to 58 after about a year of eating a whole food plant-based diet. And my total cholesterol went down from like just under 190 to just over 104. So it's like, you know, you don't have to believe this stuff. You can just try it yourself, you know, eat a whole food plant-based diet for a year and check your cholesterol. And if, you know, if it doesn't go down, like I'd be really shocked.
Yeah. And the same thing for me. I wish I would have, cause I used to eat a lot of meat, right? I used to be on the bodybuilder type of diet and just eat, you know, high protein meat, protein shakes, all that type of stuff. And it would have been nice if I had blood tests before and after so I could check, but I can't even remember the last time I got a blood test. I just pulled a hernia, so I got to go get surgery on that. Maybe they'll give me a blood test at some point during there, so I'll be able to check what all my markers are, and if they do, I'll get back to people with those results.
Nice. Yeah, maybe do a video about that.
So then the next one is pretty much the same. The next study is pretty much the same as that one, except they compared a vegetarian diet to a meat diet. And the vegetarian diet was associated with lower levels of triglycerides, LDL cholesterol, compared to the omnivore diet. So it's basically the same as the last one. You eat more plants and your cholesterol goes down. What else? So lastly, what I got here, getting down to the last two things. I guess Starch Muncher is not going to join. I don't know where he messaged me here. He said, let me just see what he says before I go on to the next thing. He says, hey, when I click the link, it sends me to Hangouts help page. So maybe I need an email. What's your email? And I'll send it to him in an email. If not, I don't know what to do. But so let's just move on to the next thing while he's putting in his email.
I got it on the screen. This is the optimal low density lipoprotein between 50 and 70 milligrams per deciliter.
So that's just what the target is. So, I mean, it shows you right here what the optimal levels are. And you could find a whole bunch of, you know, phony baloney fitness health experts online who are saying, cholesterol doesn't matter and the higher, the better, or just because this, you know, my good's a little bit better than my bad or something like that. Like, it doesn't matter how high the overall number is. And, you know, it's all baloney. Like, this has been shown to be what the optimal levels are. And you could see that in the Dr. Esselstyn study where he reverses heart disease on a whole foods plant-based diet as well, that all the people who had the lower cholesterol did better. The other ones got either a stroke or heart disease. And it's plain to see. So he just sent his email. Can you send him the Hangouts link on that email? He sent it into the group chat. Well, I don't have my email open or anything.
Yep, I'll do it. 2 seconds.
Okay. All right. So. Yeah, so this while he's doing that, this whole stream too is just basically cholesterol related too, right? So we're just looking at what is causing the number one killer, which is heart disease. You could also find other studies as well of things that affect heart disease besides cholesterol, like the heme iron and the L-carnitine having to do with TMAO. There's a lot of studies on that type of stuff affecting heart disease, and those are all from animal products and mercury and toxins, and there's 450 drugs that they pump into animals and animal agriculture. The list is endless, but then that's just heart disease. That's just heart disease. And then you can move on and go to the second biggest killer, which is cancer. And it's like 1 in 3 people develop some form of cancer. And there would be more people developing cancer from things like animal products if they weren't dying of heart disease first, right? So it's just like I say you were to cut out heart disease didn't even exist, animal products would still be giving people cancer, and even more, even at a higher rate than 1 in 3 people. And then that's just the top 2. And then you can move on from there and look at all the other ones like diabetes and, all the autoimmune diseases, chronic liver disease. And there's just a huge list. And you guys can all see this. You can see this huge list in a lecture called Uprooting the Leading Causes of Death, where he goes through the list of the top 15 ways to die. Only one of them is from non-food related things, and it's accidents, like getting hit by a car or something. The rest of them have to do with environmental factors, like putting food directly into your body. Oh, you got an echo there.
Yeah, that was my bad. Sorry about that. I'm just trying to get the link for Starch Muncher. Right. Sorry about that.
All right, that's okay. And yeah, so if you want to just throw up the last thing there, I'll just talk about that while we're waiting for Starch Muncher.
No, and just one quick thing on this, Logan. I zoned out for a second. I don't know if you mentioned it, but one of the study authors here, this guy, Al Cordain, that's Lauren Cordain. He's one of the big paleo people. So you even have a paleo person suggesting these numbers are what is optimal and physiologically normal. It's just a funny thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for his diet, But,
yeah. But it's like he knows it's just like they don't follow what they know is right.
Yeah, how would you even achieve those numbers unless you were guzzling red wine or something, right? It doesn't even make sense.
Yeah,
but
you would not. Yeah.
Yeah. So this last stuff has nothing to do with heart disease. I was just going to end my section with sorry about the ads and stuff there.
No worries.
To end my section here, there's a little funny section about Dad, Mom, I'm a gatherer, and they're upset. That's basically the kid telling his parents that he's a vegan. He's a gatherer. He doesn't want to be a hunter. His dad's ashamed of him. And this is why you actually shouldn't be ashamed, is because studies have shown that, number one, vegan men have higher levels of testosterone. And this is from a British Journal of Cancer study of 696 men, and 233 of them were vegans. So the vegans won for having 13% more testosterone than the meat eaters. So the soy boy thing is an absolute myth. It's absolute nonsense. The phytoestrogens from plants do not affect mammals like mammalian hormones do from animal products. So it's pretty easy to figure out. Phyto is plants. You're not a plant. Mammalian hormones affect mammals, and you are a mammal. So you'll hear a lot more about cholesterol, I'm sure, and testosterone and protein and all these things in the upcoming documentary Game Changers. When that comes out, I'm not sure when that'll be out. I think it's the end of the year or something. So vegan men have a more attractive scent. So it's pretty clear to figure that out even without a study. I mean, I could just tell from becoming a vegan. When I was eating a lot of meat before, when you have a decomposing body, like if you eat another animal's body and you put it inside your body, think about like what just leaving a body out, the smell, eventually how there would be a smell to a dead body. So you're putting a dead body into your body and then, letting your digestive system go to work on it. Obviously there's going to be a scent from that. But when you eat really clean, you know, herbs and spices will also give you a scent too, like garlic and things like that, onions, all that type of stuff. But if you eat like raw fruits and vegetables, there's like no scent to it whatsoever, right? Like you don't even need to put on deodorant half the time because your sweat, you know, is very mild. So there is a study on that as well.
Nice.
If you go down to the next one, vegan men are more fit. So if you compare BMIs, there's a lot of studies that compare BMIs, and the only people that are in the healthy BMI range are the vegans. Everybody else is in a range where they start becoming more and more obese. Vegan men have glowing skin. There's a lot of things linked to, especially dairy, causing mucus problems, skin problems. Animal products are filled with hormones that affect your hormone levels. If you think about how a child going through puberty, their hormones go out of whack and they get all these zits. That's what happens when you throw all these added hormones into your body. Your hormones will also go out of whack from excess hormones. And then the thing about that too is fiber will latch onto excess hormones and you know pull them out of your body. But if you don't have a lot of fiber and you're eating a whole animal products diet, you don't have that either to help with the excess hormones. So you're double screwed. Vegan men are compassionate leaders. So obviously it takes a lot of, a lot of compassion to stand up for animals and to be like, screw all of you guys with, you know, I'm not going to be another sheep and just follow what everybody else is saying. I'm going to actually look into it myself. And once I find out what's right, I'm not just going to go with the norm and go with the flow. I'm going to, stand up for what I believe in. So everybody else, you know, is just kind of a sheeple. Vegan men can cook. I don't know if that's true for all vegan men. I suck at cooking. I just throw everything in a pot.
Hey, the one pot cooking thing is a good way. I mean, that's actually a legit way. I just did a video about this because we were on vacation, and it's super easy to cook like really healthy, like one pot kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's basically what I do is just one pot, add water, throw the stuff in there, whether it's potatoes, grains, other vegetables, whatever it is, and I just cook them up and then I eat them. And then if you want to add herbs and spices on top when it's done, then that's just a great way to go. Yep. No oil. And yeah, or you just eat it raw, which is what I've been doing a lot of the times. But besides, you know, vegan men can cook, also that besides opening the door to learning how to cook more things, it also opens the door to learning about more foods that you would have never looked into before. So I'm always just finding new raw fruits and vegetables to eat in the grocery store that I've never even been interested in before. And vegan men have less erectile dysfunction. So one of the first warning signs that you're going to get heart disease is that your smaller blood vessels start getting clogged and you'll start getting erectile dysfunction. Obviously, one of the answers would be to fix your diet instead of going out and getting Viagra. And vegan men live longer, so they've been shown to live longer by 7 to 8 years. 12% reduction in all mortality than omnivores. So all those things, all in favor of people going on a vegan diet besides just cholesterol.
Nice.
Yeah. That's all I got. So I guess Starch Muncher's not showing up or not being able to figure it out.
Yeah, but next time we'll have to do a test one with him because I'm not really sure what's going on either. But
all right, man. Well, thanks a lot for the stream. Do you got anything else to add on top of all that?
I don't know. I can actually, do another anecdote just about the erectile dysfunction because I never actually had a problem, so I didn't have complaints. But I can definitely attest to getting compliments after a few months of a vegan diet. So definitely noticed better performance. And I didn't notice it. I got compliments on it. So it was very noticeable to my wife. And that's actually a pretty cool thing. And that was actually one of the things that has helped me convince a few people when I tell them that part of my story. that seems to actually go a long way in guys' heads of like understanding, like, yeah, the plaque is not just building up in your arteries in your heart or your brain, you know, it's building up everywhere. So it affects obviously that artery as well down there.
Yeah. And I hear there's a big part in the movie Game Changers just specifically about that one subject. And I've also heard people say that specifically celery is a great libido booster for some reason. I'm not sure. I haven't really looked into it, but
I haven't heard that. I'm looking forward to seeing that movie. I actually haven't. You know, I've just seen a few clips, I think, from like plant-based news, and I think there's going to be quite a few interesting sections in that movie. And there's a lot of like pretty big names in there. So I mean, the fact that like Arnold Schwarzenegger's in there and a bunch of like Olympic athletes and like just world-class, you know, people at the top of their sports, I think that's going to go a long way to convincing people.
Yeah, and then Jack also says in the chat there, Maca. John Joseph will always say Maca is for the caca, right? So that's another one.
I've been
Shout
going
out to Jacko Wacko.
Yeah, Jack's awesome. I love his channel. It's just like if you need a good laugh, and I don't know, it's all in good fun. But I try to be polite with all the meat eaters, but then every once in a while you just want to say all the kind of mean things to him, and he takes care of it. He just says everything I think.
Yeah. So I mean, I had to, before we go, since we're just hanging out here for the last, I got to go in a little bit, but I had an interesting conversation right before this about a guy about GMOs versus organic. Just briefly, I wanted your thoughts. What do you think is better health-wise and ethics-wise? Which one?
I'm definitely opposed to GMOs. I've done quite a bit of research on it, and I think really the claims that the people who make these things, so the Monsantos of the world, are very, very basically slim to none. I have yet to see any kind of convincing evidence that they are in any way, shape, or form better, either from an environmental standpoint or from a nutrition standpoint. All they really do, as far as I can see, is they enable these companies to make more money because they're able to genetically, they're able to identify the genetic code of the said seed, and then they're able to basically sue people if you're trying to like take the seed and replicate it or clone the plants or what have you. And it enables them to basically use more pesticides, all under the guise of providing more food for poor people. But there's been a lot of great information out there debunking those claims, and it's just not true. So that's my take on it. I think it's a lot better to just go small scale veganic farming.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree with you. Like they use that Roundup stuff, right? So the Roundup makes bugs' stomachs explode. So that's obviously not going to be good for a human stomach to be eating Roundup if it's making other animals' stomachs explode, right? It would just kind of, that doesn't seem right. But then, the movie Food Inc. talks about what you just said a lot about the seeds being spread. And if you are going to use, they sue these farmers and whatever, and if they are going to use their stuff, then it only works with their pesticide. You can't even choose to use another pesticide. You have to use the Roundup. But then also, like Monsanto tried to put patents on pigs, which is absurd and all this stuff, and they tried to patent animals. So I think it was in like 2005 or 6, and because like their type of soy or whatever it was they were feeding them could fatten them up faster, and they could make more and more money if they patent the pigs, and it was just all craziness, right? But then somebody today was telling me about organic stuff too, and they were saying that organic stuff is fertilized with, even though it's an organic plant, it's fertilized with animal agriculture soil, fertilizer, like their crap, that still contains like antibiotics and all these other things in them. So I don't know if that was true. I just heard that today.
So to my understanding is organic, like fruits and veggies, can have manure from animals, and in fact often does. But theoretically, the manure should only come from animals that are being fed organic diets. So if it could still be a factory farmed animal, But so the pig could still be in a really tiny cage. It could have a horrible living condition, whatever. It could still be totally, like a factory farm situation. But as long as you're feeding them, say, like organic corn or organic soy, then you could still sell that meat as organic. And then you could still use the waste as like organic fertilizer in an organic, like say, strawberry field or something. So there's no real way that you can be sure just from the organic label that you don't have animal fertilizer helping to produce it. And obviously there could still be antibiotics in there, because even though an animal might be organic, if it's sick, you might have or antibiotics in its in its body, although it should theoretically be banned to just feed them willy-nilly, because usually what happens is in the factory farmed conditions, they get fed antibiotics on a regular basis for a couple of reasons. One is that the conditions are so bad that they're doing it to prevent disease from traveling from one animal to the other, because they're so packed in that it's very easy for the disease to spread. So that's one reason. But the other reason is that it actually fattens them up faster, so they grow quicker. So they intentionally feed them even if they're not sick. But it's my understanding that you can't intentionally feed antibiotics to an organic animal and still label it organic. But I think if it got sick, you could give it antibiotics to make it heal up, and then you could still kill it and sell it as organic, I think. So I don't know. That might be like some kind of loophole, kind of thing.
Yeah, I got to look into that more, because the guy this morning, he told me like he was like 100% sure that, 99% of organic vegetables or fruits and vegetable, whatever, have feces from animal agriculture that has antibiotics in it, and all the other things too. So he was saying that all goes into the plants and it makes people sick and all this stuff, and you're more likely to get sick from organic stuff, and then that's less ethical and more expensive, and then it's also less healthy and all this. And it got me thinking, should I be buying the GMO stuff, instead?
No,
I don't know.
I think that's a logical fail, because if you think about what you just said, what the guy's claiming, there may be some contamination, on the organic stuff, but with the non-organic stuff, for 100% sure that it has the antibiotics and the pesticides and everything else. So, one of them is like there may be some on there, but the other one, for a fact, has it on there. So it still doesn't really make sense, and it wouldn't be any less. I mean, even if you argued that it was the same amount, it still wouldn't be any worse. Really, there's been I gotta look it up. I'll dig it up, because I can't remember the name of the guy's channel. But there was a fantastic bunch of videos that this guy did debunking a lot of unnatural vegans' claims about GMOs. And I know your opinions on unnatural vegan, and I think we're in pretty much agreement there. So, but she's had obviously lots of videos about GMOs and kind of praising them and saying how great they are. And this guy just debunked the hell out of her claims. And I'll dig it up and I'll put it in the description afterward if anybody wants to check those out. But I would definitely recommend that guy's videos. He goes into the nitty gritty of all of these kind of claims, both about the effectiveness of the GMOs. So basically in either nutrient value or environmental impact, water usage, et cetera, et cetera. He just goes through the whole thing and shows how it's just a big crock. It doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
Yeah. So yeah, John Joseph, if you've seen his videos, he always talks about how bad GMOs is and only buys organic. But then, then I hear that today and I'm like, I don't really know what's the best alternative. But I mean, the thing is, if everybody stopped buying meats, right? If everybody stopped buying animal products, then, I mean, it would all of that would just go away anyway. So that's still the best option, is to still just stop buying the meat and the animal products, because then these animals wouldn't be, getting, there would be no industry like that. And then people would be just having maybe some animals for fertilizer without stabbing them. And then they would have veganic farming and permacultures, things like that. That would still be the best way to just not buy animal products. But the thing, to me, it's kind of sucks to think about maybe both are bad, because then you're like, I want to grow stuff in my backyard then, or I want to, try to push the idea of like maybe permacultures or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an inconvenient truth. Most people don't want to really garden, but that's the angle I push. So, I mean, everybody who knows my channel, like, you'll see like half of my videos are about gardening and stuff, and that's kind of my whole point. That really, that's the way you know what you're getting, and you can definitely do it veganically. You can use, leaf mulch. You can use tree, wood mulch. The thing that a lot of people don't realize, so a lot of people that claim this stuff, like you need animal agriculture for the fertilizer aspect, the thing that they don't realize is that the amount of manure produced by these factory farmed animals is so huge that it's definitely a problem. So the amount that gets used as fertilizer is way, way, way like less than the total amount of manure produced. And it's not an issue of like, we need this many animals to have that much fertilizer. You could get by with, way, way, way less animals and still have plenty of fertilizer. The problem is not having enough fertilizer. It's having too much poop and you don't even know what to do with it. There's actually a really good video by Bite Size Vegan where Emily talked about a contest that was put on by the animal agriculture industry in the US. They were funding a contest where you could figure out solutions to like part of the manure problem of what do you do with all the poop. It's definitely not an issue of like not having enough. And even if we say got rid of all animal agriculture and you still needed some, which you don't, because like I said, you can do it with mulching and other things, just returning the weeds and the green and everything else to the soil. But even if you did need some manure, you could use human manure. A lot of people do use human manure. They call it who manure. And you can actually, do hot composting. And if you just wait long enough and or use hot composting, you can actually safely use that to grow even food. And people do it all the time. If you look it up on YouTube, you'll see a lot of people with homesteads and what have you, and they do it. And so there's just no argument against veganic gardening. And even if you did need some manure, you could just as well use human manure.
Mm-hmm. So the thing about permacultures too, I remember when we debated Milk Jar, we did talk about permaculture. I think it was Milk Jar. We talked about permacultures. We compared his numbers to the permaculture numbers, and they were obviously better. I was looking for those the other day. I couldn't find any because it seems like it's a very hard thing to find online is like these numbers. And then you do find numbers and then you find out they're not that big or whatever. So I was just wondering like if you could send me that too, like
Sure.
If you remember where they are and like the best numbers that you could find. I'd like to compare those two to like say like a monocrop of like sweet potatoes or grains or something like that to see if like it actually holds up. I think a permaculture would actually be better than veganic farming even, right? Because, a veganic farming, from what I've seen of it, it's still kind of, a lot of it still is monocrop looking. It's got a lot of like greenhouse type of stuff. And then obviously like a tree that provides oxygen as a roof compared to a greenhouse would be a lot better because then that's also like a home for animals and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you the information. I'll put it below in this video too. But I just pulled it up because I have it handy. And I agree with you before I even read this. Polyculture is kind of where to go. So if anybody wants to look into this, read up on like Sepp Holzer or Fukuoka, Masanobu Fukuoka, those guys, and like Jeff Lawton and a couple of other people like that. There's a really wonderful channel called Gardening with James Prigioni. I'm a huge fan of his channel. He's not a vegan, but he does a food forest back to Eden style, like a mulched gardening. And his gardening is basically veganic. Like he's not using any fertilizers. He's not using any pesticides, no chemicals. He's just using the mulching. And he's growing wonderful, wonderful, like fruits, veggies, everything in a really small farm in New Jersey. So definitely check out his channel if anybody's interested in that. And that guy's just awesome. There's another website. There's another YouTube channel called 1 Yard at Revolution, I think. 1 Yard Revolution. They're really good too. And that guy's basically doing something similar. He's just about like a veganic gardening as well. And that guy uses leaf mulch, which is just as effective. So anyway, the numbers here that we were looking at, because Milk Jar was saying that he wants to do like a cow, And what I showed was that I looked up information from various farm websites, and you can expect about 490 pounds of meat from a 1,200-pound steer. And in order to get enough calories, where I was just assuming about 2,000 calories a day, you would need 1.5 to 2 acres of land per pasture raised cow. And depending on the area, some people say that could be as high as 4 acres per cow. And the one cow would break down to about 1,000 calories a day. So you really would need 2 cows just for one person. So what you're looking at is if you assume like 2 acres per cow, you would need 4 acres of land to have 2 cows to get over 2,000 calories a day. So basically, you know, you're already looking at 4 acres just for one person. And for a family of 4, multiply that up, you'd need 16 acres of land. Now, that's a huge amount of land. Most people probably wouldn't have that kind of money or space or what have you. And then what I compared it to was a family of 4. So again, same number, family of 4. They produce 90% of all the food they eat on 1/10 of an acre. And they're not even vegan. They're actually vegetarian. Here it is, it says they produce over 6,000 pounds of food per year on 1/10 of an acre. They're just outside of Los Angeles. They have over 400 species of plants. They produce 4,300 pounds of vegetable food. They have 900 chicken eggs that are produced and 1,000 duck eggs. They don't eat the animals. They do eat their eggs, and they sell the eggs too. They do make honey as well. So again, like I said, they're not vegan, but they are vegetarian. They do not eat the meat. They don't kill the animals. They just eat their eggs. And then they also make seasonal fruit throughout the year. And what these 4 people do is they actually, like I said, make 90% of what they eat. And what they do is they sell the other stuff that they don't eat, like the eggs and milk from the goats that they have. And they earn $20,000 per year. And again, this is from 1/10 of an acre. So compare that to 16 acres that you would need for the cows. And yeah, it's just very clear that, like, you know, these guys could just as easily do that without, you know, either consuming or selling the eggs. Like, and they would still be able to, you know, do the same amount of farming, or they could just keep the animals as pets and just use their poop for fertilizer. I mean, you could do that too, and it's not a huge number that they need for that. So I'll send you all the links to this stuff. Like,
yeah, I wonder what the numbers would be though, like if against like a monocrop of just if you're gonna eat like just corn or something, right? Would you be able to feed the planet on permacultures? Like, I'm sure you could, right? It just would be
absolutely
take some figuring out. Yeah,
absolutely, you would. I think if you read people like I really recommend the book or the guy that I mentioned at the beginning, Sepp Holzer. He's got a book called Permaculture, and if you just type into Google Sepp Holzer Permaculture, you can find a PDF of it. I'm sure it's illegal, but just download it and read that. That's a really great book. And in his book, he explains kind of why we have this monoculture. It's really just efficiency and like money. The companies that are producing the food, they want to basically maximize their profits. And how do you do that? Well, you do that through automation. And the reason that you have these long rows of, like, say, just corn or just whatever, you know, one particular thing is because you make this specialized machinery that can come through and harvest that food automatically. So you don't need to pay people to walk through the fields and pick it up and, you know, put it in the thing. And if you did the style of farming that, say, like the Native Americans did, where you had corn growing and then you had beans that grew up around the corn stalks and you had squash growing underneath, that could be a really healthy system that doesn't deplete the soil. In fact, it actually improves the nutrient value of the soil. The beans are nitrogen fixing. They take nitrogen from the air and they fix it into the ground through their roots. So you can keep growing that mix of vegetables year in, year out, and you don't deplete the soil. But the problem there is that now you need people to go through and pick the beans. You need people to go through and pick the corn. You need people to pick the squash underneath. And you just can't do that to scale and make it as cheap as you know, as people want. Not related to veganism, there's a wonderful kind of thing about the book In Defense of Food by Michael Pollan, where he talks about stats from what people pay for food like as an average, I think it's US figures of their income. So he tracks, like, 50 years ago, what people paid as a percentage of their income for food, and what they paid for as a percentage of their income for, like, say, doctor's bills and medical costs. And I don't remember the exact values. If people know, they should just check out the book or whatever if they're curious. But I mean, it's like the order has been, like, reversed. So he shows that, like, 50 years ago, I'm just kind of guesstimating the values because I don't remember, but let's say it was like they spent like 30% of their income on food, and they only spent, like, say, 10% of their income on medicine. And now it's the other way around. They only spend 10% of their income on food, and they spend 30% of their income on medicine. So, like, these are, like, really interesting things, and it ties directly back to this idea. And John Joseph does talk about this a lot too. It's like, you need to decide where you want to spend your money. Do you want to spend your money on buying, like, say, organic or like veganic or polyculture, permaculture raised squash and corn, or do you want to get the genetically modified Monsanto and then spend the amount of money that you saved, spend it at the doctors, or, like, get, like, heart disease and what have you? And that's what people need to ultimately decide, I think.
Yeah. So also then, if people did decide that, then the government, like, in a perfect world, healthcare would go down. People would complain, oh, like, all these healthcare workers, I am not getting enough shifts, I'm losing money, I'm losing a job. The government should pay them to then go into, like, the food industry and be the people that are helping get the food. Like, if there's people lacking in that industry now, have the medical healthcare people go into the food industry, and then, maybe pay them the same. It all kind of work out the same.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely solutions. In the chat, I'm looking, there's Fawn's Homestead Life is basically talking about some interesting things about growing and fertilizers and stuff. And I want to make it clear that I think absolutely, if somebody, even if they're non-vegan, but they're making their food at home, it is certainly still way more, like, environmentally friendly and basically, like, probably healthy, because they're probably still not eating a lot of the chemicals that you would be getting if you're eating the factory farm stuff. The ethics aside, keeping your own chickens and killing them and whatever, it's still, I would say it's unethical, but I would certainly say it's still probably less unhealthy than eating a factory farmed animal. I would just say simply that you don't need it, and you can absolutely grow a great abundance of food without any kind of animal inputs, and that's where I would suggest people to do it. And you can check my videos. My garden is going crazy right now. There's, like, I've got corn up to my chest. There's, like, squash growing. There's zucchinis growing. There's more tomatoes than I think I'm going to know what to do with. So I'm going to have to do some canning and stuff. And yeah, things are just not as difficult as they seem, but it involves manual labor. Like, people have to go out and kind of pick the stuff.
Yeah, and the thing about too, like, if somebody's talking about, well, I use chickens or whatever animal to fertilize and whatever, like, if you have a permaculture, animals are just going to show up. Like, a chicken's a bird. There's going to be birds that are showing up, living in your tree, your mango tree, whatever type of fruit tree you got, and they're going to be doing the same thing. So it's not like you have to go out and buy birds. Like, there's going to be birds, there's going to be squirrels, all sorts of animals coming in and out of permacultures, because the permaculture is nature.
Absolutely. Yep. And then let's not forget, as Leon pointed out too, that the chickens need to eat some food too. So thanks, Leon Kutzstrup, for that. Yeah, like, that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize when they say, like, oh, I'm doing sustainable, whatever kind of animal farming, small scale stuff at home. People point to, like, Joel Salatin and stuff like that, where he's got the little chicken coops that he moves around, and they do foraging in the grass. They eat the bugs and stuff. He is still feeding them feed. They are foraging for themselves, but he is still feeding them feed, and that is coming from somewhere else. And if you just look at the just kind of the amount of input to output, just calorie wise, the amount of corn or other grain that you're feeding to, say, chickens, if you just ate that corn yourself versus the amount of calories you get from killing the chicken at some point, or even if you're eating the eggs along the way, you would still be coming out better if you just ate the corn yourself. It just it's inefficient. So when you're feeding another animal to then either use its byproducts like milk or eggs or its meat, it's certainly less efficient than if you just ate that stuff yourself.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks a lot for the discussion and everything. I'm gonna watch soccer now too. If anybody wants to tune over to my next live stream, I'll be watching the England game in the World Cup.
Cool, man. Have fun. I'm going to be getting going and get the kids in the bath. So thanks, everybody, for joining.
Right.
And thanks, Logan, for being on. We'll try to get the other guys on some other time, and we'll do a test stream to make sure they can actually join. But, yeah, hope everybody enjoyed it. Subscribe to everybody's channels. And, yeah, see you in the next one. See you, Logan. Bye, everybody.